Excellent. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We have a nice interview with a fellow who, for various purposes, we're just going to call Bob today. How are you doing, Mr. Bob?
I'm doing fine. I have to say, I'm a little hoarse because I'm battling allergies. I live in a very verdant place, so I get a lot of we get a lot of stuff here. So if I sound a little hoarse, that's the reason.
That's
Otherwise, I'm doing
okay.
fine. Thank you.
I also sound that way sometimes, many times. I cough a lot on this show, and I sniffle, and I don't have a cough button, and I never will. I refuse to give in to that. I like to have it natural. Um,
Yeah.
so I think it's fine. But for our listeners, I wanted to have you on because you're sort of like the person I know of that has one of the most you know the trad movement better than I think anyone. So much so that you abandon it. Which is that fair?
Well, I guess I'll say I was a trad on and off. And is my audio okay? Just real quick.
It sounds a little bit like you're a little muffled. Are you far away? Are you in?
Is this better?
Try say again. A little better.
Okay, I don't know what. Maybe I'm in a big room. Maybe if I go in another room. Hold on a second. There might be an
Yeah,
echo.
the big a big room can often throw it off.
Yeah, that's fine. Go to another room. Yeah. So in terms of being a traditionalist, I have to say, I guess I in my mid 40s. My first mass was back in the old days. Like, you know, 1 day a week in a basement on, on a blood moon, when you sacrifice a virgin. It's very, very rare to
Yeah,
find a
yeah.
Latin mass. It was 93 was a thing, and it was like only once a week. I mean, I'm from out west where it's a very liberal. I was in a very liberal church in a very liberal diocese, and there's sort of these stalwarts, who, I guess it would be the Legion of Mary, where they were like the last crypto trads, if you will, and then a bunch of Mexican grandmothers. So
Yeah.
that was sort of it. So that's gives you some idea of how long I sort of kept tabs of it. So yeah, I've had decades. If you want to talk about traditionalism, yeah, I mean, I guess you could say I'm a trad now, because I do go to a traditional church, and I do actually, I do actually like singing a stola and stuff like that, but it's more just like a social thing, I guess. If you
Yeah. So
know,
you're saying
about
you were in
religion.
the you were fighting against so you were like I don't know if fighting is the right word, but for listeners that aren't aware, Catholicism went through a big revamp, Catholicism 2.0 in the 60s with the Vatican II council, and there was a group of people, very small at first, but they've grown since, who were like, none of this is okay. We need to stick to the way things were prior to that, which they assumed had been back to Jesus, although that isn't the case. Um, and so you were like one of the first. Were you in with Lefebvre? I can never say his name correctly.
Well, I was a seminarian for a couple of years.
Oh yeah,
Beginning of this, you could say, I sort of pushed back a little bit. I think while traditionalists punch above the weight, and I can tell you because I'm still among them right now,
right.
that they really do. I mean, where I'm from, like there's a, you know, St. Joseph's altar and the war church on. So I'm sort of between within, I mean, walking distance really of churches. And the one our little chapel put on, which is, tiny minuscule versus an actual Catholic church, was actually way nicer. I like there's a 2 and 3. Whereas and the who put it on was like a married couple with 5 kids. So it's
Mm,
like these people are very like involved in what they're
right.
doing. So I get to see the good stuff like that. But I mean, in terms of numbers, they're sort of minuscule, really. I mean, I don't know. I think that what it is, it sort of is a. I think it really is just like a neurosis of the hierarchy coming out of the Second Vatican Council because they knew they were sort of doing something that wasn't entirely correct, but
Right.
that, and when one or two people sort of stood up and said something, they were like, "Oh my God, these people are horrible. What are we going to do?" But I mean, average normal Catholic has no idea, the tradition, what the traditional mass is. A lot of them don't even know that the mass used to be in Latin at this point. I mean, these Zoomers, and I mean, I have two, teenage kids, so I mean, they don't know. I mean, and they don't know, that at one point all, Latin, was, that the priests faced the other way, everything was in Latin, whatever. I mean, they don't know this stuff. So it is just, it is just a very weird, it's a very weird like obsession, like, somebody who's like really obsessed with an ex-girlfriend they broke up with 20 years ago and can't
Yeah.
stop talking about them. That's sort of that's attitude of modern hierarchy towards the traditionalists, because I mean, what harm could it do? Are we going to have one or two churches out of dozens and dozens within the diocese where they say mass in Latin? Oh, poo poo, who cares?
Right.
But people do care for some really bizarre reason. And I mean, I can give you my theories why they do, but I mean, I don't know if they're leading up to that or you want to just ask something else first.
Well, I'm fascinated by it because it's we get to live in this time where we see a major religion change in real time. And it's
Mm-hmm.
always been sort of hypothetical about like how religions change over time, and they I think in the past I mean there were times when they changed faster, but I think in the past they generally change slowly. And in my opinion, I mean the past I mean just I converted to Catholicism in 2015 and it's already a completely different thing. I mean it's
Mm-hmm.
like it's already completely like when I was there was all this discussion because 2015 was the year that gay marriage was legalized. And I remember being on Catholic forums because I was trying to learn more about it. And like, well, the church will never approve that sort of thing or whatever. And then now they all but do on paper. They bless gay unions, and the people and the trads people will deny up and down that's what's happening, but you can see them doing it. Like you can watch it happen. And they have all this legalese
Well,
about why it's not. It's wild to see it happen in real time. And I think it's what you said is so interesting that people it can happen that easily. Now the newer generation doesn't even realize that the whole thing used to be in Latin and the whole thing was totally different. Don't even realize it.
I mean, I had a train of thought, but let me see if I can return to it. But I think the real issue is fundamentally. I mean, I guess I had a train of thought, but I guess I could push in another direction. That everything's changed. I
Yeah.
mean, I mean, my parents. I mean, both my. I mean, my father unfortunately has passed, but my mother at least is in the early 70s, and my in-laws are in the early 70s. And my mother didn't even have running water because she's from Mexico. I
Right.
guess I'll give that away. So she's Mexican, and she didn't even have running water, let alone indoor electricity. I mean, even when I visited her village back in the 80s, we had electricity maybe a few hours a day.
Hmm.
They didn't have running water. And my mother has gone from that in her lifetime, from that to being able to send cute emojis on her little cell phone, on her boomer memes or whatever, and text message, to her son who lives hundreds of miles away. That's just
Right.
reality. I mean, so it's not weird for them that the religion changed completely because their lives changed completely. I mean, my father-in-law was a sharecropper in the
Yeah.
South. That's, you can talk about that life. I mean, I would say both my parents and my father-in-law picked cotton, and we
Yeah.
can't imagine what that's even like. So for their religion to have changed, I mean, in that way, I mean, it's not that hard. And To be honest, I mean, my in-laws, I mean, my father had nothing, wanted nothing to, I mean, he was raised Catholic, but he didn't wanted nothing to do with the church after he was, became an adult. My
Hmm.
mother, but none of them liked Mass and Latin. None of them miss it. None of them cared that it's in a different language or that the priest turned around or any of this stuff. It
Yeah, yeah.
really is just almost an accident of history that certain people actually just didn't go along with it for some reason. Because I mean, it started way before. I mean, this gets into minutia. Maybe I don't want to go in that direction, but you're saying that even with you in 2015. I mean, think about what I experienced, growing up, in the 80s. I
Yeah.
mean, I remember priests who still said parts of the line. I mean, it was a lot of things, but I mean, they were clearly older, Polish, Irish priests who sort of, remember before the council and sort of gradually, sort of ease their way into it. I think
Hmm.
it's just our life is moving quickly, and I think the conundrum that the church faced in the not even in the 60s, but even before, coming out of the Second World War, was, are we going to change with the world, or are we going to be bulwark against it? And I
Right.
wouldn't even say that. If you're going to say that, we're going to go all the way back to when Ratzinger said that the Second Vatican Council was a French Revolution within the church. So, I mean, we could go all the way back to 1789, because that was really the real main contention within. I mean, if you go to a traditionalist group like the Society of St. Pius X and Lefebvre, I mean, it's fundamentally, if you go to traditionalism outside the English speaking world, it really is. It's more political than it is a liturgical one. Yes, liturgy is nice or whatever. They don't like the new liturgy, but they have very. I mean, often they're involved in conspiracy theories about Jews and Masons and whatever. But I mean, fundamentally, they'll go back. It's like when did the crisis in the church start for like a French traditionalist? I mean, the real old school ones will say it wasn't the Second Vatican Council; it was the suppression of Action Française in like 1925 or something like that.
Right.
They'll go back that far and say that's when the church betrayed, and that's, if you know anything about like Jacques Maritain and things like that. That's where liberal Catholicism started. Basically was on the ropes, getting pummeled, and that's when they sort of roped the dope and turned it around and started beating back on right wing integralist, clerical fascist, if you will, Catholicism. So I mean, I'm throwing a lot of history at you, but it really is kind of like I sort of approach this from so many facets, from the political facet, from the sociological facet, from the anthropological facet, from the liturgical one, from the theological one. I mean, you could have this conversation for hours trying to say, what root is, why are things changing so fast? Well, coming back to my point, fundamentally because there was a struggle, this tug of war going on in the church, where the Second Vatican Council, they're like, okay, we're going all in. We're just gonna you know, and I mean, I mean, I don't know how much of a believing Catholic you are, so I'll say it because I'll say this might sound a bit cynical, but the church has always been the religion of the empire
Yes.
since Constantine.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the issue is going up to 60, there was a real ambivalence about, okay, the world's going in one direction, we're going another. And with somebody like Pius IX, and the First Vatican Council and the whole, the syllabus of errors and all these other things going up to Pius X and the what is it, the anti-modernist oath and things like that. Which every priest of the Second Vatican Council had to swear, the anti-modernist oath before the tabernacle, before Jesus. They had to swear all this stuff that really did really need. They thought this was a bunch of hooey and bogus, and they couldn't wait to get rid of it. But I'm just saying, all these very liberal bishops you hear about in horror stories in books like The Rhine Flows Out into the Tiber or whatever, all these people were on paper like super duper reactionary, but they didn't really mean it because they saw how unrealistic it was to sort of hold this line.
Right.
Where was it, Gregory the 17th or something? In the papal states, the one before, I don't remember the numbering, but the one before Pius IX, basically wrote against and banned the street lamps, and the railroad.
Yeah.
He called
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
railroad the chemin de fer or something. He called it it's like, a play on the French where he said it was a road to hell.
Yeah.
Railroad,
Right.
railroads. I mean, really. So there was
I
this.
mean, that
It
was
was
not an
really,
uncommon sentiment. You read the same, like J.R.R. Tolkien talks about the railroad
yeah,
being like this. It's hard for us to imagine, but if you're living a
right,
pastoral life and then here this thing comes barreling through the countryside every day, it probably does feel a bit apocalyptic,
yeah.
maybe.
So I mean, basically, and that sort of brings us to the present day. I mean, was the church going to make its peace with the neoliberal order? And mind you, with the Second Vatican Council, I mean, you did have the peril of communism. So, or whatever it was, if you want to believe that. So, were they going to side with the emerging neoliberal order, and become the religion of that empire? So I would say that if you look like the modern reorganization of dicasteries, all this like jargon and the language of Laudato Si and all this other whatever. I mean, I don't buy into it at all, but if you really want to define what's going on, it's like, well, they're just trying to become the World Economic Forum at prayer. I mean,
Yeah.
really, it's like you might as well move the Vatican to Davos kind of thing. I mean, that's really what they're trying to do. I mean, and if you look at the language of NGOs and you compare it to fiducia supplicans and you compare it to all this other stuff, I mean, it sort of like makes sense. It's like they're trying to get side the emperor. Emperor
Yeah.
just happens to be what's his face, whoever runs the World Economic Forum. I don't know. I forget. Carl Schwab.
Carl Schwab.
Sorry,
Klaus
Carl
Schwab.
Schwab. Yeah, Carl
Klaus
Schwab.
Schwab.
That guy.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's just really like, what is the religion that would be most palatable than that guy? And that's what happened with the whole, in my opinion, what happened with the whole fiducia supplicans and the debacle with the German bishops. Is like it was too much too fast kind of thing
Mm,
with
right.
them, because it was really just so. I mean, if you understand that, if you understand, okay, why did they let Joe Biden, even though he wanted to kill with diseases, he never saw an abortion he wouldn't approve, or whatever. Like, why are they doing this? Why are they doing this?
Right.
Why are they doing this? Just look. I mean, follow the money, follow the influence. I mean, who? If the Catholic Church became the, what the reactionary fever dream that the trads want it to be tomorrow. That was sort of the spoof about. I don't know if you saw the series of Young Pope, that one on HBO, but that was sort of the. I mean, if you haven't, it's interesting. I don't know if I'd recommend it, but I
Right.
mean that was sort of the spoof. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I haven't seen it. I know about it, but I haven't watched it.
Yeah, I mean it's whatever. I mean, I always it's the best. It's the best piece of Catholic artwork in the last 50 years, but that's not saying a lot. Kind of,
Yeah, for sure. You got that, and
it's
then you've
not
got
saying a
the
lot.
artwork made by that molester guy.
Rhythmic. I mean, that's
Yeah.
the other thing. I mean, why is that guy? Why did I mean they sacked what's his face Sitka or whatever his name is in Texas, where I mean the joke was in Tyler, Texas, or whatever his name is.
Yeah.
I
Strickland.
forget
Wasn't it Strickland?
Strickland, that guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I always say that, the only reason, I mean, I was mouthing off. It's like, I don't think there's a worse punishment than being Bishop of Strickland, Texas. I mean, have you lived
That's
there?
fair.
I mean, it's like, what are you going to do to like, what are you going to do with them after that? Like nothing. I guess they found something, but whatever. But I mean, if it's like, why do these people get away with it, whereas others people don't? It's like, it's just clear because it's all just. I mean, and I don't. Have you heard of Malachi Martin?
Uh, I've heard that name, but I couldn't tell you anything about it. About him.
Yeah, I think if you read like the novel Windswept House, which he wrote like in the '90s, he was a anyway, he was a Jesuit priest who sort of had a falling out with I think he was the secretary of Cardinal Bea, one of like the very like prominent um, um, liberal prelates and that around Vatican II. And for some reason, he had a change of heart. Some people say he was just like he was a spook, really. I mean, maybe he had CIA ties or KGB ties. I don't know. I mean, he was a very he's got a very weird. He was a Jesuit and he was laicized. He had a very weird trajectory, and he became a sort of a pseudo trad. But who knows? He might have been living with a woman. I don't know. But he was on Art Bell a lot. You remember Art Bell? I guess
Yeah, yeah,
you're
yeah. I
podcasting.
love
You
Art
might
Bell.
know. Yeah, he was on Art Bell a lot, and he had all kinds of crazy conspiracy theories. But there was this novel called Windswept House, and in the 90s, and he wrote it. I mean, I don't know if you'd like to read it, but one of the things, I mean, it talked about, satanic rituals in the Vatican and whatever. I mean, it was clearly like, it was like Art Bell version of ecclesiology kind of thing. So I don't
Sure.
entirely discount that, honestly. I mean, even with the traditionalist stuff, I don't discount that there might be something nefarious, tantric, weird stuff going on in the Vatican that the traditional Latin words, you recite them around certain cardinals, they become like vampires and their skin starts to smoke or something. I mean,
Yeah.
that's entirely. I mean, did you read what like they caught Rupnik, what Rupnik was accused of doing?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
did
yeah.
you
I mean, like
read it?
the idea that they could be doing bad things in the Vatican is in no way
Yeah.
unbelievable.
And so yeah, I mean, and that's been going on forever. I don't know if you wanted to if you had like another because I can just ramble and go
Well,
on as you can
I
tell.
guess I would.
So I
So
don't know if
I
you
guess
had something else.
I want to tell you my thesis is why traditionalism happened, and then I want to hear yours and like where you come because I think the trad movement had to happen because a lot of people actually believed it and they bought into these claims of like eternal truth. We're telling you things that are true transcendently and will always be. And then if you go around and you say, well, it's different today, that throws people in cognitive dissonance mode. And then that's why I think that the trad movement comes with conspiracies necessarily, because then you have to try and square that circle and say, well, it is secretly true, but because of these machinations behind the scenes, it appears not to be true. And so I think that um, is where is why those two, and that may be perfectly, I'm a conspiracy theorist myself. It may very well be the case there are conspiracies in that way, but uh so I think and I think that's what it has and I wanted to hear your, because we haven't discussed this yet, but you struck me as a guy that went so far into that you believed it so hard and you knew your stuff so well that you eventually said there is no way this is true, and you became a Hindu, which is an
Yeah,
interesting arc
basically,
for a Mexican Catholic to take.
right.
Is
So
that sort of what drove your journey and what drove you to do this, or am I off
well,
base with my assumption?
I'll go back. I'll throw like a wrench into it because I could go like to where traditionalism started, but I think we go back way further. Like you have to go back. I mean, we can go back like Council Trent, but I'll just for the sake of for this conversation, I'll go back to just the 19th century
Okay.
and just say that ultramontana. So basically, what traditionalism is basically. I mean, in the end, it's sort of like a lost cause,
Yeah.
a version of the Catholic Church, or as I'd like to call it, or the other thing I've called it before is like it's the white man's version of the ghost dance. So I don't know
Mm,
if we need to like explain that to people that they're sort of like when at Wounded Knee, or I think it was Wounded Knee or wherever, where they butchered all these, where the American army butchered all these indigenous people. I mean, they had this ghost dance religion where the indigenous people of the plains, you know, obviously, their way of life was destroyed, not just through brute violence, of
right.
people coming and shooting them, but really it was a re-engineering on of their entire landscape, of their entire cosmos, if you will.
Yeah.
That where they had to chase buffalo, they followed the buffalo herds, and whatever, and those just all disappeared, within the period of a couple of generations. That they were in a world they had no idea what happened. There was just a severe sense of whiplash. So their ideas, at some point, one prophet came back and said, well, if we do this dance, things will go back to the way they were. The buffalo herds will come back, the prairies will come back, the white men will disappear, the railroads will
Right.
disappear, these towns will disappear. So if we just keep doing it, it'll all just go back to the way it was. But
Right.
I mean, as we know with romanticist movements like that, especially in the 19th century, the way it was never that way. It just wasn't.
Right.
So I think what traditionalism is trying to preserve is basically the ultramontanist religion that was created in the 19th century that you could say replaced the Catholicism that had come before, that had been before it.
Yeah, that's a
And
beautiful point. Like I brought that up to people before too. Like the thing that you think is trad was itself created in a previous revolutionary cycle.
right,
Yeah.
or in response to a revolutionary cycle,
Right.
take Lourdes, take the virgin the apparitions at Lourdes, for example, where she said, she ends up coming, and Saint Bernadette speak French. She was in Languedoc or whatever, or Occitan, I believe it. But it's like a cross between like Catalan, Spanish, French, whatever.
Hmm.
So she appears to this illiterate shepherd. The Virgin Mary supposedly appears to the shepherdess girl, and says, "I am the Immaculate Conception."
Right.
Like some years after it had been declared a dogma. So there's clearly some sort of. Am I saying that this was purely just a propagandistic, you know, thing that was pushed by people that was in reality was a fake apparition? Look, man, I'm like I became a Hare Krishna. I don't know. I believe all kinds of crazy stuff. I mean, people got Shakti, could throw around. I mean, in reality, my pet theory is that the early Christians were basically shamanistic, and that's
Hmm.
how the early church was established. I mean, things happen, weird things happen. But as a guitarist says, non è vero ben trovato. Like, if it wasn't true, it's a good story at least. Like, to think
Right.
that this was just a propaganda win
It
by the
is. It is
Vatican to
very
say,
convenient that they declare a new
right.
dogma, and then oh, there's an
And,
apparition that says, oh yeah, this is true.
and of course, then the role of Fatima with being anti-communist or whatever. So, I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
like you take some place like Ireland, for example. I mean, what was Irish Catholicism before the potato famine? It was like going to pray at wells that had been sacred for centuries, maybe millennia,
Right.
that at some point was associated with a saint. And they said, okay, and they go to this well, and maybe they had mass rock, but I mean, their entire like if you listen to my mother tell stories about how her life was in the village in Mexico in the 1950s, it wasn't some trad fever dream. It was a complete. I mean, their Catholicism was determined by the cycle of the seasons,
Right.
by just being peasants, trying to eke out a living and being dirt poor,
Right.
and entire. I mean, their idea of what illness was. I mean, was took some borrowed something from medieval, early modern like ideas of humors and things like that. I mean, they had something like I remember my mother telling me that they, wide belief in the evil eye, embargo, as they call it in Mexico. I
Hmm.
mean, and what it was, you had to, if you saw a baby that you were admiring, you had to touch the baby, because if you didn't touch the baby, you could give the baby the evil eye. And the evil eye wasn't intentional in this culture. It was just, you just gave, because you had envy towards that baby, or you had this weird desire towards that baby. There's some sort of weird transference to that
Right.
baby where the baby will get sick. So the remedy was you took an egg, you basically you cross the baby over with the egg several times, repeating certain prayers. I've heard it was like the Apostles' Creed or something. and then you crack the yolk and you put it in a bowl and you put it under their crib
Right.
overnight. And these are good Catholics doing these rituals, mind you. I mean,
Yeah, I
this
mean,
is
for most of
like,
history, Catholicism, Christianity has been like folk witchcraft with Jesus smeared over it.
and I guess the straw for me with traditionalism because I remember growing up, my other grandmother, who was actually born in Texas, and she was but she didn't speak English for some reason. You know, she didn't speak any English, and it
Right.
was weird growing up that somebody told me it's like I remember my grandmother speaking English, and my mom said no, she never spoke English. Like okay, whatever.
Yeah.
She had an altar to it was an altar to a weird soldier. It was like a photo of a soldier. Apparently, she had a skull. That, and
Mm.
she also had images of like the crucifixion of Jesus and like the Holy Family and stuff like that. But she had a special altar on the side. It wasn't until I was in university, after in my late 20s, that I found this book and I looked at this book just completely at random. I looked in the book and it said Juan Soldado. And
Mm.
it turns out it was a guy who was accused and maybe convicted, I don't know, of like raping and killing an 8-year-old girl. But people said he was innocent, but they shot him before giving him a fair trial. And because people felt guilty over this sort of this crime, if you will, they started placing stones on his grave. And if you go to Tijuana now, it's a full-fledged shrine. And this is
Yeah.
how sanctity originally emerged with the martyrs. And maybe these people were martyrs, maybe they weren't, maybe they were just, it was just a reconstituted like pagan shrine. But this is like not just like a one-off incident. If you go throughout Latin America, if you go throughout Europe, throughout the Middle Ages, I could tell you all kinds of weird, like they in Italy they venerated this guy who was a mummy. In Spain they had statue of a girl with two heads because that was the only place they could put the church was the only place they put the statue and people would pray to it. Like they were all this really bizarre stuff. And of course, if you know Saint Winifred, who is the dog saint, the entire book about which is
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
fascinating about that. But if you go, so you're like saying, okay, what's tradition? That was tradition.
Right.
That's how people saw their religion. Their religion was that. And when I don't know how I fell in with the trads, that I mean, there's a very I could sort of tell that story. But if we're just talking about traditionalism, that is a very new religion from the
Mm.
19th century. And if you study various religions, like the one I identify with now, which is Gaudiya Vaishnavism, which is in the West is called the Hare Krishna movement, in the 19th century was also reconstituted. There was also a period of decadence. There was also like the various reformers, like the Dom Guéranger and Lacader, and all these, and the Pius IX, Pius X. Like there were also these figures who reconstituted the religion to fit the middle class urban aesthetic, sensibility, morality, etc. So, like, how
Yeah.
old is this stuff? So,
That is
I don't know.
that is what tradition. I mean, quote unquote traditionalism is sort of like it's sort of like highbrow. It's like philosophy, Aquinas. We wear nice suits. It's sort of like a highbrow. It's not like the religion of peasants. And I guess, like you're saying, that's been happening everywhere as the world's gotten more affluent and connected to technology. Every religion is having to make that shift, and
Mm-hmm.
so it's just this. I don't. How did you? So how do you deal with personal like? I guess did you find do you find anything that is just transcendently true all the time, or you feel that it is like do you feel eternal truth is a thing?
Are we talking about what I believe now? Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, obviously, yes, because I mean, I switch. So, I mean, what you ultimately have to do, and I'm not going to go too much into the weeds, is truth. And I think the incarnation is the problem.
Okay.
Everything really is a problem. And for me, if we're talking truly, I mean, okay, I'll back up a little bit further and say that the only reason you, and this is going to sound really weird, and it's going to sound really like non-transferable, but the only reason you should believe in anything is because God has come into your life and in some way showed himself to you. And I think
Hmm.
that's what I believe in a
Okay.
sense. That's the only reason. Because before, I don't know how much you know about Hare Krishnas, but before Hare Krishna, I was just meat eater. I wasn't a big drinker, but I mean, I certainly didn't oppose it. I mean, I basically lived off caffeine. Like I did all the stuff that I had to give up. You know, I mean, I used to laugh at vegans and
Right.
vegetarians as much as everybody else. And no, I am one. So, I mean, there
Hmm.
was something drastic happened in my life where I think I always say that the difference between one of the things I've said is one of the between a Catholic convert and a Protestant convert is a Catholic convert is like, I'm an accountant by day, but I have my buddies from college and we like got together and we were reading the fathers of the church. I decided, wow, that's a really good, that's really interesting that they had the Eucharist back then. I should go check out the Catholic Church and I should go online on forums and stuff like that. Okay, but like who's a typical evangelical convert? Oh man, I mean, I had a drinking problem. My wife left me. I was in a hotel about to blow my brains out. And then I opened up the Gideon Bible and, there was a verse that said something. And then the next day I went to church and I stopped drinking. I
Right.
mean, that's a typical. I mean, nobody goes into Catholicism like that. I mean, nobody. I mean, if you are like suicidal and that point, the last place you should go is a Catholic church with 5,000 families. You
Yeah,
know,
that's
and
true.
just trying to get you in and out of there like in 15 minutes or less. I mean, you're
Right.
gonna just go into your car and just pull the trigger because I mean it's depressing. But I mean, you go to some place where there's a light show and people are waving their hands and they're crying and they're turning in the word and they're opening it up and they're reading something and something stirs with them and you watch The Chosen 5,000 times. I mean, stuff like that. I mean, that's that for me. Okay, I was at that, but I went in an entirely other direction. Like I just became a Hare Krishna instead
Right.
because I can't do the. I, I mean, after I concluded Catholicism was kind of bunk, I wasn't going to become a Protestant. God forbid. And Orthodoxy is like laugh out loud. No, like what? I
I
mean,
agree with you so much about orthodoxy.
like the issue with, I mean, that's a 5 second. My 5 second explanation is like, if orthodoxy is true, considering how many Orthodox are there in the world, maybe 300 million, 500 million, maybe half a billion, I don't know. There are 1,320,000,000 Catholics in the world. If
Hmm.
God so epically screwed up by saying that this is a true church that you have to like belong to, and by the way, it's like the super minority church that you can only find in these few countries and with these weirdos and maybe they have one church within a 100-mile radius, then your God is really messed up kind of thing. So if Catholicism is not true, then Christianity, I don't know about that.
Hmm. Hmm.
So backing up to the incarnation, I mean, really, I mean, I don't know how much time we had, but if I were to say it like to give the elevator pitch, I would say that you're never gonna get to the spirit from matter. You're just not gonna. It's just not gonna happen. So you're just gonna have to ditch matter entirely, and you're just gonna go for pure spirit. And how do you do that? Well, that's that goes all the way back to the Rig Veda. How long was that ago? Kind of thing.
Mm.
That really the thing that gets in the way of love is not an improper use of the body. It's the body as it exists in the material world itself. Once you decide that your really real relationship with God is to realize that this is all just a really bad dream. And you just got to, and it's all based on something that is somewhere else. It's like all dreams. Like if you dream, like I always had a recurring dream growing up. I took a train from San Francisco to Lhasa, Tibet. I mean,
Hmm.
Lhasa, Tibet and San Francisco exist, but they don't. You can't take a train from one thing to another. Like
Right.
there's this. We're in a nightmare vision, a nightmare reflection of something that actually exists, that is our actual identity. And but we're just passing from from dream state to dream state to dream state until we actually. I always say that we've been almost, you can say, almost eternally back. We've been looking for love in all the wrong places, and it will only stop until we find it.
Mm.
And that is, and that is basically, when you go to the Bhagavad Gita, saying that you have to conclude, we're not this body, you're not even these thoughts, you are not this life, this is not your reality. Yeah, I mean, I love my kids, I sort of love my wife, whatever, I love all these things, but they're also involved in deeply somebody else, that you have a final form that you're trying to get to, and this is not it. So that is sort of a very, basically, you could say that's unfalsifiable, because it's like, well, how do I prove that? You don't prove that. It's like, how do you make marble out of, how do you make marble out of dog crap? You don't.
Hmm.
That's basically sort of, so that's sort of the radical, at least the radical philosophical leap. And I was a furthest from being able to do this. I was rather a rank materialist. I was basically, even when I was, so I mean, I'll tell you that I've had a not really great 30s and 40s, in terms of a personal life, but I have sort of consistently sort of gone to church, but for a lot of it, I didn't believe in it.
Right.
And I was just the furthest from buying into these Eastern fever dreams of Maya and stuff like that. But it just really was like, okay, I have no other choice. This is where I'm going. I don't know if you want to continue with that or talk about Catholicism more, because I could go down. I can give you like a catechism, Hare Krishna catechism, from start to finish, but that might be kind of boring.
Well, no, I mean, I'm definitely interested in that, but the thing that always draws me to your writing is that you have, I think that you've seen enough Catholicism and Christianity more broadly to, you have a respect for it, while at the same time, which I think is interesting, being able to very accurately pinpoint precise reasons why this or that statement by the Catholic Church is self-contradictory or bullshit. And if you could like, okay, take for example, if you were going to do in like a few sentences or paragraph, how could deconstruct the whole trad argument the way that maybe it was deconstructed for you, what would you say about it?
I mean, you can't beat the house.
You can't beat the house.
Honestly, like you
Exactly.
can't.
It's
That's
still,
it.
they have the Novus Ordo has the Catholic Church name on it, and that's all that matters. And the belief system that goes on does it is irrelevant.
Well, let me
Yeah.
tell you. I mean, let me tell you what. I mean, I'm friends with friends. I sort of follow the local Sedevacantist priest on Twitter, who basically says mass in the barn. It's not a barn. It's like a shed.
Right.
And down the road, I mean, I have back in a year. I almost want to go back just to give him some books. I have a bunch of books lying around that I never use, that I actually got from another priest. And I mean, it occurred to me. He sort of told me to my face that I have a demon, because he does know that I'm not really a Catholic. Like, I go to Catholic churches just to pray and to be edified and to have sort of a devotional experience. And he told me I had a demon up front, which I didn't take personally. But
Right.
it sort of reminded me that the two trad arguments, especially for the Sedevacantists who don't believe that the Pope is even the Pope, is that there are two things: demons and the end of the world. That's it. That's their
Mm-hmm.
argument. That it's demons and it's the end of the world. Like, you can take every single trad sermon, because it's like either the what happened didn't happen for bad nefarious reasons, because Jews, because Freemasons, because communists, because demons, whatever, you know not so none of the stuff, don't have to take regard for any of the stuff that's happened since the 1960s because it's all tainted, it's all bad, black and white, up and down, good and evil, cops and robbers, whatever. And in lieu of that, you're like, well, that's curious because you're basically in 1870. You guys define the Pope as some basically God on earth. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Vatican one, yeah.
Pastor attendance. Yeah, you can kind of. I mean, people try to nuance it a little bit, but not really. I mean, if you didn't get it in writing, then who cares? Like, if you didn't get any like limits on the papacy in writing, then they're irrelevant. Like, you can't.
Correct.
It doesn't hold up in court. So I mean, the only other response is like, oh well. So you guys codified this guy as sort of God man, and within 90 years there was none on earth, or he went crazy, or you can't trust him anymore. And you're just like saying, well, how does that work? And they're just like, well, easy, because the world's going to end.
Yeah.
Okay, that's an argument, I guess, and that's sort of the end of the conversation. Because where do
Yeah.
you go from? I mean, where do you go from having framed Catholicism in this epic, beautiful, all triumphalist, way where we have all the answers, and then you try to and then within less than a century later, it's all gone to it's all in shambles, and
Yeah,
it
you
doesn't
can't
look
you
and
can't
you
have
can't
like
trust
we know
anybody.
everything, we have the perfect truth,
Right.
and also we have no leader because there's a secret church hidden in shambles and everything. Like it's completely but I get why people do it because like you want to have it really does it like there's a logical consistency uh to all the people saying there is no pope and all this stuff and that the church has betrayed itself and like because they're just looking at what the current like they're just pointing out hey these documents that you've released recently contradict the old documents that you said were infallible. And so what do? I think
Well, I mean, if
Vatican
we're
One, I
going
think
to
you're
this,
right. Declaring the Pope infallible was really the jumping of the shark. Because before that, you always had an out like, well, he was wrong. But now you can't do that anymore.
well, if we want to just talk smack and not be go into like philosophical issues, I mean, really, and this sort of alludes to when you're saying you became a cat 2015.
Right.
This new batch of traditionalists, and I don't know if with them, old, there's some old, heads in there, like Michael Matt and people like that, I've been following, for like 30 years, like literally in that way. But I mean, there's a new batch of traditionalists, like, I don't know if you heard of that Peter Kwasniewski guy and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. Like, these very like newer people who are shocked that the Vatican isn't being orthodox. Whereas somebody like me, an old head, even though I'm not old, I just started very young. Um, basically remembers where, I mean, the Pope kissing the Quran, the prayer meeting in Assisi, like
Mm-hmm.
the joint declaration with the Lutherans, 2000, where the John Paul II apologized for everything, from the Crusades to his mom,
Yeah.
like there's all this like really questionable stuff that all of these people, who some of them are older than I am, some of them are 50s, 60s, like somebody like Janet Smith, for example, who's gone super trad, who was like big JP2 Catholic. I've seen her in person, actually. I saw her in 2008 in a conference somewhere, where these are like very like gung ho JP2 Catholics, like talking like the world's going to end, and you're just looking like, it's like that meme where James Franco's in the news is like looking at like first time. It's like it really is that, but
Yeah.
but it tells me like somebody like Scott Hahn, for example, was like Mister like normie Catholic, like
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
and stuff like that. And but it just betrays to me, and I hate to say it because I'm supposed to be nice, but is it going to come across as kind of insulting? That these people just don't know how to think. Like, they
Yeah.
don't know, they can't follow an argument, or they can, but they're so shrouded by the prejudice that everything under JP2 was hunky dory, and big bad Pope Francis came along and changed everything and made it so that it's unacceptable. It was unacceptable for a lot of us in the 80s and 90s when your sainted Pope was apparently at the helm, hobnobbing with Maciel and, basically appointing all these very liberal bishops, even though, I mean, it was, John Paul II made Bergoglio a cardinal.
Yeah.
Like, how do you explain that? Like, in reality, it was all just like a lot of it is just like straight out Freudian. Like, these people have like really weird psychosexual issues. Like they like, as long as the gays were in the closet, like as long as the parents were in the closet, as long as they didn't have to deal with it, as long as they didn't have to see it, as long as there was a certain amount of petty bourgeois propriety to it, they could look the other way. But fundamentally, the theological foundations, theological foundations, and theological differences between a Carlo Wojtyla and a Jorge Bergoglio aren't really that much.
No, not at all. Yeah.
Even Joseph Ratzinger was a modernist at the council. He was a liberal at the council. He got buyer's remorse. Okay, fine, I'll admit he got buyer's remorse. But there's no way of painting around it. These people all have the same theological apparatus, and the rest is just window dressing. The rest
I
is
feel that
just,
way about
you know,
politics as well. Like I try to get people to see, like people are like, "Oh, we need to," like George Bush did the same. They did the same
hello?
things Clinton did. That all of them were bombing the Middle East. All of all of the things were happening the same, no matter what. It's just the boilerplate rhetoric was different, but or the I guess the perceived image was different, but it's just always there. It's like a mirror image. It's always the same. Like people like there is no there's just the house. There's just the empire and it does the same thing. It just does what it does.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, how do you? I don't know. I guess what was the point you were asking of that specifically? I don't know, but yeah, it's the changes. I mean, is it going to get better? I don't see it getting better because people just don't know anymore. They don't know what it really means to be traditional. And I'll even take my own chapel that I go to on Sundays or I volunteer at or whatever, where it's like these people don't know anything. They don't. I mean, I don't know why they make such a big deal about Latin. They don't understand it. I understand Latin. Like,
Right.
I mean, I'm not great. I'm not Cicero, but I mean, I mean, Church Latin is pretty simple anyway, so it's not that hard. And they make big deal about, oh, the 54 Holy Week versus the 62 Holy Week, and all these other sort of minutia things. Like, you guys don't fundamentally do not know what you're doing here. Like, you
Mhm.
don't know. It's like,
They don't know what they're doing, and the people
right,
going to the Novus Ordo don't know what they're doing. No one actually cares. That's the thing that I've learned.
no,
People, 99% of everybody does not care about being logically consistent with their faith. And that was the hardest thing for me to accept. That's what kept me going round and around with people. Like, no, but I kept being like, no, but don't you see that can't line up with this? And they just like, well, shrug their shoulders and move on. And like, I don't see how but it took me so long to just accept most people's metaphysical needs can be met with the thinnest, I don't know, threadbare explanations. And that they
you
just
know,
move on.
you know what I call it? I have a pretty bad name for it. I call them pew fodder. I mean, that's all they are. I mean,
Yeah.
that's all. I mean, God bless my mom and stuff like that, but she's kind of that way. I mean, my mom has sort of a prayer life too, and so did my grandparents who were charismatics or whatever. I mean, but in reality, it's pew fodder because the liturgy. If we're going to go to like the fountain, the foundation of the traditional movement, which is the liturgy, the
Right.
liturgy has been dead in the West. I don't know, probably 1,000 years, maybe longer
Yeah.
than that. Honestly, I mean, it wasn't something that anybody cared about, worried about when they changed it. I mean, that's sort of. I mean, if you talk about what are arguments against the traditionalist movement, I mean, the other one is just that people didn't care.
Yeah.
Like, they
It's just
fundamentally did not care
that's
that they
that like I said, that's the
movement.
hardest thing for me. That was the hardest thing for me to accept is just how many people do not care about this stuff
Yeah.
because they claim it's so important, and I that was the hardest thing for me to be like, you're saying this, but then you don't actually care about it in any way. Like to even know like the basics, you know?
Well, I mean, the new masters are trying some logistics over ritual, really, and what it is because, and I haven't regularly gone to the regular Catholic mass since I was a teenager. Like
Hmm.
really, I mean, I was Eastern Rite for a while. I was all kinds of other things. I do not go to it. I only go, but I think once, like a couple of years ago, my family and I started trying to go to my to a local church, and so I observed it a few Sundays and then I stopped. Like I stopped trying to pretend. But it
Yeah.
really was like there was like nothing going on until communion. And then communion became like this this very like choreographed logistical feat of trying to get like all these people in and out of their pews as quickly as possible to take communion, go back and then finish up and leave.
Yeah.
Like that was my whole like observation. Is everybody was like ho hum, we read some stuff, we start saying some prayers, the priest says some stuff, and then everybody, frantic communion. Okay, get them in, get them out, get them in, get them out, get them sanctified, and then push them out the door. That
Yeah.
was always my. But I mean, have you ever heard of this book called Why Catholics Can't Sing? It's by like Thomas
Yeah.
Gray.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the beginning of that book. I don't think I've ever actually read it, but I read the beginning. And the beginning of the book was in the 1950s, and it was a scene of like a church in New York City or wherever, and it's all these people with their prayer books and their with women with their hats and men in their suits, and the scene begins with a guy coming out of the sacristy like a Catholic usurper, kind of frantic, saying like, okay, I have an announcement. Unfortunately, we have had to move the solemn mass to this mass, and so this mass will be a solemn sung high mass. We apologize for the inconvenience. And he leaves, and and like 90% of the church got up and left
Mm.
because their experience in the mass was a half hour recited low mass, no music, no frills, maybe a short sermon. They were in and out in 40 minutes.
Yep.
That was their experience. And the idea that they would have to sit there for an hour and a half listening to Gregorian chant and all these other things, these beautiful things that traditionalists about now, pulsed them to the point that they got up and went somewhere else.
Yeah.
And that church at my mass at my church like can last for 2 hours for the priest gives long homilies or whatever. So I mean that tells you enough that you need to know. And I mean the liturgy was like a non-existent thing for my parents and grandparents' generation. It just did not exist. It was in Latin. Nobody understood anything. The priest turns back to you, whatever. So how do you fix something that's that broken? The answer is you do not fix something that's broken. It's just
Yeah.
broken. It's done. You don't. There's no way to. That's why I don't get angry anymore about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't get angry because I don't fundamentally don't believe in it. I mean, I haven't been to communion. I might ameliorate that and start sacrilegiously receiving communion at some point. At least once in a while, just be less dishonest with people or whatever. It's complicated. Whatever. I mean, religious experiences are weird. But I mean, I haven't really received communion in 13 years. Like I've gone to church this entire time not receiving communion because I just had respect for it, but I don't. But I just made my peace with it. Look, this is the way it is. Having a relationship with God as well as they can within this context. That includes trans, it includes ascetics, it includes everybody. I just don't see this as fundamentally more truthful than the mega church down the road or the
Right.
mosque. Like I just don't see it. Like I think fundamentally my idea is basically what so we have a book called the Srimad Bhagavatam in the Hare Krishna religion, and I won't go into it, but one of the fundamental premises of that book, if you're going to push off, actually, it's like 18,000 verses, and is that there's only three things that exist in the material world. In this world, the only three eternal things are bhakti, bhakta, and Bhagavan. which means it's devotion, it's devotional service, it's devotee, and it's God.
Mm,
That's it. That's the only reality that is permanent here, that means anything. So people are trying to have that relationship however they are. God, God forbid that I'm the one who tries to make fun of it, obstacle it. I have my own preferences, I have my own prejudices, formed by a lifetime of whatever, my own faults and offenses and whatever. But I'm not at this point. I'm not going to say, oh, they're doing it wrong or they're being wrong. They're doing the best they can with what they have. Is sort
mm,
of my. But if you have that attitude, I don't think you could be a Catholic, at least a good Catholic, because a good Catholic is all about the truth. It's all about exclusivity. It's all about I want this one answer, and if I don't have this answer, it's what Newman said. Cardinal Newman. He called it. It was like an existential issue. Him staying in the Anglican Church versus him becoming a Catholic was an existential issue. It was an ontological issue because he could not remain in it because once he crossing the Catholicism was crossing it from darkness into light. It was
mm,
from the error into the truth. Whereas I'd be like, you know what? Some people just got to be wrong for the right reasons. Whatever. That's in our scriptures. It's like 11th Council, Srimad Bhagavatam. It's right there. There's some there's some books that might be quote wrong. They may say entirely different things than I believe, but that's where that person is at in the mode of passion, goodness, passion, and ignorance. They're just they're just doing their thing. Hopefully they'll get around to the right thing at some point, or maybe that is the right thing. Maybe they're going to end up somewhere in the spiritual world where that stuff is more true than false. And God bless them. I'm probably not going to be there with them, but whatever. So that's sort of my the indifferentism. Uh, When I go to the Catholic and a regular church now, I just find it depressing, honestly. Like, I just don't know. Like, why are you doing this? Like, I don't know why
that's
people
that's
bother
the thing.
doing
I
it.
don't understand why people go. Like if they're not going to give it serious, like a little bit of effort, just a tiny bit to understand like anything about it at all. And that goes for Protestants as well. Like you go to like almost everyone in Protestant churches is also pew fodder. They don't know anything about the history of
Right.
Christianity. They can't explain their belief. No, no, I like. Why are you here? I don't get it. I guess community maybe, but that doesn't even happen in a Catholic church. You just go in and go out, and no one talks to you. So
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if you want to steer in another direction. You had another question or something. I just, or you want to know more about what I believe, or you want to just end it. I don't know. I don't know how long we've been talking, but
we've been going for a little over an hour. I guess we'll finish up with one question. I guess did you through all of your did all this cause you pain? Like, was there a lot of emotional pain in going through? Like, did you want it to be different and it wasn't? And like, did you get
well,
to where
I
you
had a
are? Like,
religious.
yeah.
No, I had a religious vocation. I did not. My so basically, what happened was I was a seminary with the Society of St. Pius X for a couple of years. Before that, I
Mm,
was living in one of the retreat centers, sort of the religious houses, sort of living that life a little bit. And then I left that. I ended up hitching up with a monastery that it's like marrying the wrong person,
mm,
really bad. And it's, I'm not gonna name it. I'm not gonna say what it was, but I basically was in my late 20s. I had wasted 6 years of my life
mm,
um, in this. So I was, and I still think, I mean, I'm still hurt over it. And I'm like, it's been almost 2 decades, where you don't
yeah.
really recover from it. And I think like my marriage sort of like being what it is sort of a product of that too. So yeah, I mean, but I don't think that was like I don't think that was a product necessarily of broad theological and sociological issues. It was really a product of my own sort of spiritual journey and like it's like what do you do when God rejects you? Like that's
Mm,
that's kind of harsh, man. It's like where it's like I gave my life to God twice. Like I gave up everything. I did all this. Like I didn't let it in when and 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 where I got off the airplane and didn't know if anybody was going to pick me up.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had to like I was really worried. Like it was really a leap in the dark. You do this twice and then you just get spit out into the world. And I've
Yeah.
been sort of recovering from that ever since. And you know, and I have a very normal life exteriorly. Like I have a house, I have a mortgage, I have a job, all these responsibilities and all these other, but like it gets to, and I guess that's why I ended up going back to religion, even if I didn't really leave Catholicism because I couldn't, because my family's Catholic and whatever. And I really had to like, how do I make sense of all this in my life? Like, why did what God, what the heck happened there? Like, what was that? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm still trying to make sense of it. But I mean, in terms of the Catholic Church, it was. I mean, I think I could just explain to you sort of like why I ended, like if I did, if I go back to being a regular Catholic, I would go back to the SSPX. Like I just
Yeah.
without because I think that is like theological. That'd be the most logical thing, like from a view of like actual practice. Become like going to a place where the bad people can't get you and just being a Catholic the way maybe it wasn't entirely right, but it was in the same language. It was basically the same vibe as what your grandparents and your great grandparents worship, like how they did it. Like it
Right.
was that not being able to do that as a teenager that sort of got me on this road to begin with.
Mm.
It was basically there was like an old like at the back of the church in my liberal the church was built like in the 1870s, so it was an old church. But in the back of the church there was this literature rack, and people would put like the Fatima Crusader. Once I found like a book, a devotional book from the Dominicans from the 1950s, and this was in the 90s. Like somebody had just
Yeah.
put it there. So people were putting all these like archaeological artifacts of a church that had not that I just barely missed for like 10 years,
Mm.
10 or 20 years, like by a generation, and being able and just looking at these artifacts and saying, okay, how am I going to make sense of this, and how am I going to like I still pray to I mean in a matter I pray to Mary and Saint Joseph and people like that. I think they're devotees of the Lord. I think they I think the Hail Mary is a prayer is a Ave Maria is a prayer that I can pray um, without many poems. I love reading the Psalms in Latin and stuff like that, because I understand them. I think it's just who I was because I fought so hard, so young for this stuff. And I'll tell you what really converted me, because I was an atheist in college. And what really converted me was going to this Latin Mass. And again, I didn't really go to communion. I wasn't really, didn't consider myself Catholic. I just did it because I was lonely, I was depressed, I was sort of lost. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember one Sunday they did this Mozart Sparrow Mass. You can look it up. It's a shorter one of the shorter masses. It's not even that well known. I mean, it's known, but it's not like the mass in C. I just floored me. Like I had tears. I don't remember. And these sort of very intense experiences. And I don't make heads or tails of Catholicism within my within my sort of theological philosophical worldview now because it just doesn't make sense. But a lot of the accoutrements of it and a lot of the whatever, it's like it's still part of who I am in this lifetime. And I
Yeah.
don't feel like I can abandon it now, kind of thing. And like and at the end of the day, like I said, it's like I look at these people who are trying their hardest, and yeah, they can be Pharisees and the priests who give weird hellfire and brimstone sermons and things like that. And I know a lot of these kids in these chapels with a 6 and 7 kid families, a lot of these kids are just going to be it's kind of a mini apostate factory. You can't get
Yeah.
around it. It's going to happen. They're just going to leave like all Catholic families in the developed world are leaving. But I mean, Catholicism is becoming something that I can't really go along with. Like I could never really go along with. I wish them well, kind of thing. But and I think in their own sort of weird corner of the universe, they're doing their thing, and they're trying their best. I just don't see how they get from A to B, but that's fine. But I mean, as long as I have some relationship with the Catholic Church, it's going to be with the traditional branch of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know. I don't know if that's a good place to conclude or whatever. If you had any other places you wanted to
No,
go, I
that's a
mean, I
fine
just
that's a fine place to end it. Thank you for doing that. It was good to hear your just more about what how you got to where you are. I've been following you for a long time, and I was very interested.
okay, great. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Bob.
Okay,
Bye bye.
bye. So that